All right, welcome. Well, it's always good to see how popular versus breakfast, and I'd say breakfast is winning right now, but that's okay. I'm going to start off, and I'm going to just show you that our track record, I do things a little differently than some here that are on stage. I put big money in big companies, medium money in medium companies, and speculate carefully. And we've been as successful as anybody on the speculation side, but the big monies did really well. This is January to January 2019 to 2020. And the zero really was up 39% from the time we recommended it. The reason I put 0% is we rate the companies, and anything above 4 is a buy, and a 2 is like hold it, don't buy it, perhaps consider selling some. So if you average those, we had a 63% return, which is double what the S&P 500 did last year. This is kind of the mission statement that I follow. It's not my mission statement exactly, but it talks about Robert Hemhill, who was from the Federal Reserve, and it talks about the system that we live in. If the banks were paid, if all the bank loans were paid, no one could have a bank deposit. There would not be a dollar of coin or currency in circulation. This is a staggering thought. We're completely dependent upon the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we're prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent monetary system. When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless position is almost incredible, but there it is. This is the most important subject intelligent persons can investigate and reflect upon. It's so important that our present civilization may collapse unless it becomes widely understood and the defects remedied very soon. I have to add that that isn't current. That's been around for some time, and we're still here, and we're still pumping out money, and things are still moving along. But I will also say my most famous statement, all fiat fails. So see where we're going. Real briefly, I hope everyone in this room agrees with me. You don't have to, obviously, but you know, people say, oh, this is how it works. Well, this is how it works. I think this is the best illustration of how the world really works. If you see at the very bottom of the pyramid, people, planet, and all living things, that's us. And above that is government. So I want you to understand that government is really about as low on the pole as you can get. The only thing lower than us is their subjects, which is us. But above that is the corporations, the corporate world, the corporatocracy. Some call it fascism, some call it corporatism. It's the corporations that are international. That's what runs everything, and they're dependent on the people above them, which is your giant commercial banks. And they're dependent on basically the speculators, which are the investment banks. And up the chain you go to, you get to the World Bank, and then you get to the Bank of International Settlements, and then whoever's running the whole thing, I don't know. Really, there's lots of conjecture. So government basically takes their orders through the corporate world primarily. I mean, how do you think the Patriot Act came into existence? Something that thick, like literally overnight? Give me a break. So enough politics, let me move on. Let's do something important like, what if silver were treated like gold? I gave this lecture in Vancouver recently. Just want to give a little bit of linguistic background we're all familiar with. This is from my friend Norm Franz, who wrote Money and Wealth in the New Millennium. I actually invited him to the Silver Summit years ago. Those that follow me closely probably know that. And he states, gold is the money of kings, silver is the money of gentlemen, barter is the money of peasants, but debt is the money of slaves. And we all know we live on a debt-based economic system. The gold standard, I'll kind of just let that go into your consciousness. Everything in our world in the West pretty much is talked about in being in terms of the gold standard. If you have such and such software, that's the gold standard software. You have such and such TV, that's the gold standard of televisions, or such and such, you know, whatever. So it's kind of like the top tier, whatever you can get, everything's off the gold standard. So it has a very powerful meaning in the vernacular. The golden rule, of course, we all know that. It's kind of like the number one, do that, you're good. J.P. Morgan, gold is money, everything else is credit, 1912, just before the Federal Reserve was founded. By the way, as an aside, Morgan was actually in favor of and I'm not a big fan, even though it's my name and we're not related, but he was not for fiat. He was more for honest money, but he was overruled by the Europeans. So let's look at silver. What's in our consciousness about silver? The complete guide to U.S. junk silver coins. Think of combination junk, you know. Silver, gold is the gold standard, but silver is junk. That's kind of interesting. And don't scrap your silver just yet. It sort of has a negative connotation. You got some junk, you're going to scrap something. And then, of course, you can always melt down your silver, you know. That's something you can do. If you're going to scrap it, you melt it down. But I want to be fair. There are some positive ones. Born with a silver spoon in your mouth usually implies that you had rich parents. And then one that's kind of neutral. Every cloud has a silver lining, so when times are bad, there's always something bright that you can uncover in that situation. Before I move on, I just want to remind everyone, and I know I'm in Canada, but for those US-based or those that follow monetary history, the whole United States system was built on the silver standard, not on a gold standard. That's how it was laid out, and $1 is a weight of silver. It's 371.2 fine grains of 999 fine silver. So if you really knew what I know, not that I know that much, but if you knew that silver was a weight, you could walk up to a farmer's market and say, I would like $1 worth of carrots, please. And he would think you're talking about a piece of currency, but what you're really saying is I would like 3/4 of an ounce of carrots. That's what I'd like you to weigh me out. But nobody knows that anymore. But I still, you know, someone's going to follow my footsteps, hopefully, or not. I mean, I think it's important. I just read you the intro, you know. It's one of the most important things intelligent people can discuss. You may agree with that or not, but that's where I'm at. So coming back to reality, everything I've said so far is real, but I think, you know, where does all this money and all that, what does it mean? And Adam Smith, labor is the first price, the original purchase. Money that was paid for all things. It was not by gold or by silver, but by labor. That all wealth of the world was originally purchased. So I think we have to bear that in mind as well. So, banks dissing silver and favoring gold. Remember, I said the U.S. was built on a silver standard. But that changed, basically. This is a movie. You can get it for free on the web. Just type in The Secret of Oz. It's Bill Still. I know Bill personally, not real well, but I've been at a few conferences and talked to him one-on-one. Very interesting documentary. And it boils down to this, that the real meaning of Oz was all about the yellow brick road. It was a one-way road, a one system, going off of silver, going on to the gold standard. The bankers owned the gold. They were going to the Emerald City with those greenbacks, and they were going to control everything. They were going to kick the farmers and the laborers, you know, the bottom of the pyramid I showed you a while back. They're taking those folks, making sure that they obeyed, and they were going to do gold-only standard. And once you go to a gold-only standard, fiat isn't far. Every time you've been to a non-bitalic standard, then you get to the next step, which is a monometallic standard, which is gold only. And then from there you get gold certificates, and from there you get fiat. And that's a brief rundown on monetary history. It's happened again and again and again. When things blow up, then you usually go back to a gold-backed system of some type. Whether that happens this next time remains to be determined. And Oz was represented an ounce of gold. By the way, she had silver slippers on the yellow brick road. But in the movie, they were ruby because they just produced Technicolor. At least that's the story. They were ruby in the movie, I know that. So the most powerful facts about the gold and silver ratio. I get this question all the time. You know, does this gold and silver ratio mean anything? Well, it absolutely means how many ounces of silver it takes to buy an ounce of gold. That's the meaning of it. And then what's implied in that is from the gold and silver ratio, what can you determine about the future price of either metal? That's really what someone asks when they say, you know, what does the ratio mean anything? Because, you know, any 3-year-old kid with, or, you know, first, second grader would know enough arithmetic to know what the, you know, real meaning is. I just defined. I know you can't see this. This is for me on the stage. But I really thought about this gold-silver ratio question, and that's when I came up with this lecture. But if you go back about 5,000 years or so into early Egypt, it took 2.5 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. That was a ratio, 2.5 to 1. And then about 2700 BC, which is again almost 5,000 years ago, it took 9 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. So you go through the list, you can go through, different time periods. Plato, 12 ounces to 1. You go into Germany in the 1500s, 10 ounces to 1. You go through the 1800s, it got up to about 20 to 1. And this is a chart of it. It doesn't go back as far as that, what I just showed you, but it does go back to about the 13th century or so. And you can see that basically the gold-silver ratio stayed around 20 or less for thousands upon thousands of years. 3,000 years ago to present day is 5,000 years. And it's only been in the last 120 years where the ratio got above 20 to 1. And really, there's a message there, and it's very clear to me, or at least apparent, and that is when they serve the same functions, which is money, silver is far more valuable than when it's demonetized and called an industrial commodity and it's junk or it's scrap or it's melt. If it's money, it's far more valuable. And the bankers have an issue with it, and that's why they took it out of the monetary system, as I tried to explain. This graph came in Forbes magazine right after Warren Buffett bought 129.7 million ounces of silver in 1999. And what this graph represents is the inflation-adjusted price of silver. So again, remember I said 1999, so it's a little bit off because we've had inflation since then, but not much, but the idea is very sound. So if you go back into the 13th century, you'll see the high price of silver in real terms, in dollars in your pocket, more or less, $1,477. So if I say silver's going to 100, I'm not that big of a crackpot looking at the monetary history of silver where it was almost $1,500 an ounce at one time. And it wasn't there for like a spike and it was a day, like the $50 move in silver with the Hunt brothers. It stayed at that level for quite some time. I know it's hard to see this graph, but you can see the blue line, which is what I'm focusing on. You drop down into the 14th century, the 16th century, and it was around $200 an ounce for a few hundred years. And then it dropped down to about 70 for a few hundred more years. And as I explained earlier, once you got into the last 120 years, you've got these very interesting ratios that have taken place after the crime of 1873 when silver was demonetized. So the power of silver is when it's money. And that's what drives the silver price. Even though about 60% of the silver market is based upon industrial demand, it's the monetary demand that moves the price. Any market moves at the margin. I think we all know what that means, but for a brief refresher, when you're sitting at Sotheby's and you're bidding on the Rembrandt, it's the last bid that takes the painting. That's what it is. That's the margin. It's the last bid. And the margin of silver is those people that bid up the price for monetary demand. And that's why we saw silver and gold do so well from roughly 2000 to 2011, is that gold was an 11-year bull market. Every year over year, if you'd bought gold and held it, you were worth more at the end of the following year than you were the year before. Silver was a little bit more erratic, which it usually is, but silver actually outperformed gold on that run. And the main question, I think, for this audience is, will it happen again? And I'm almost certain it will. And how far it's going to go remains to be determined. Central banks and gold. They bought about 224 tons of gold in the second quarter of last year. This is the gold holdings by central banks, which I think found very interesting. If you go back to 2000 when the bull market started, the central banks basically fed gold into the system, all the way down to what? The financial crisis. And then after the financial crisis, what did they do? They started owning gold more and more and more again. So it's pretty interesting for me because it is the money of last resort, even though no one really talks about it outside of groups like this. You're not going to hear it on CNBC or BNN or any of the main financial channels. But believe me, the central banks own gold for a reason. They know it's the money of last resort. They know if everything blows up, they've still got their gold, and that's just the way it is. Although, as I said, not talked about. This is probably the most important graph I have in this presentation. Remember, I titled this, What If Silver Were Treated Like Gold? So what if, imagine that the establishment thought of silver as money, not as junk or scrap or melt. What would that mean? So here's the holdings of central banks of the world, and they own 1.6 trillion worth of gold, and they own 1.6 billion worth of silver. But if they valued it as money, and they had a 50-50 split, gold and silver in their vaults, remember, 1,000 thousands is a million, 1,000 millions is a billion, 1,000 billions is a trillion. So silver would have to go up 1,000 times in value to equal the amount of gold value. Now, I am not suggesting that the price of silver is going up 1,000 times. What I'm trying to permeate in this room, into your consciousness and deeply, how undervalued silver is, and really why it was demonetized. Because the value of silver would be so high on a monetary basis to maintain the amount of printing that's gone on in the last few hundred years, really, especially the last 30, 40 years since the gold standard was nixed by Mr. Nixon on August 15th, 1971. So there you have it. I mean, you can make with that what you want. Again, I'm not saying it's going up 1,000. I'm just trying to give the idea of how little silver is valued and how valuable it really is. So back to me, a little bit about what I do. You already saw that. You know, we have a pretty good track record. If you're so inclined, I think a few of you probably have cell phones in here. You can either write this down or do it now. I'll leave that up there for a moment. You can just text us there, or you go to the website, themorganreport.com. It's all one word. Morgan's pretty easy to spell, themorganreport.com. Or you can take a picture of it, take it home too. That's probably an easy way to do it. So I have always, for the 22 years I've been publishing, finished every report with wishing you wishing you health above wealth, wisdom beyond knowledge. It's very important to me, and no matter how much money you have, it doesn't guarantee you a good life necessarily. Certainly money's important, but I'd say health is more important. So as Mahatma Gandhi, one of my idols, I guess, is that health is real wealth, and it is not pieces of gold and silver. I think that's important to keep in mind. I have a lot of personal stories around that I don't have time to go into, nor do I wish to. That's sort of what it looks like. It's electronic, like everybody these days. Most people print it out. And I do have one teaser here. On my spec side, this is a technology company. It is not a mining company per se, although it actually was spun off from a mining company. We were the first on the story. Very few even know about it. The stock was financed at 25 cents. It's around $1 right now. One of the major banks came in at $1.50. I thought that would be the floor on it. It is not. It's, as I said, $1. But a good grade gold mine will give you about that much gold per ton. Whereas if you recycle circuit boards from computers, you're looking at the amount of gold held by electronic waste. And even though there's 165 million ounces of silver recycled every year, that's probably less than half that's available, and that's just silver. So this is a very important situation for two reasons. One, you'll be able to get these precious metals, even like tin, and the platinum group metals was just announced. I'm going to be doing a free webinar on that next Thursday if you're so inclined. So get on the free email list. You'll get an invitation to hear it, and you will get the company's name, by the way. But this is done with an inert method. It's without cyanide. And this is big, especially everyone is, more and more green, sustainable development and all that stuff. The CEO spoke at the United Nations on the sustainability conference. So that's it for me. And that's one of the books. That's another book. It's another book. Done. 33 seconds to go.